Welcome to the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast. Many thanks for joining us on the Journal of Biophilic Design. Today, we're really excited to be joined by Stephen Edge, who's known to many of you, I'm sure. He's founder of Salvage Sustainable Design, which is a biophilic lighting and interior design consultancy. We're going to be discussing how biophilically designed architecture supports our innate desire to be close to nature, which obviously improves the overall health and well-being of the clients and also the cities and the buildings that they occupy. We're going to be talking about the award-winning project, The Spine, which is a new home for the Royal College of Physicians up in Liverpool, where randomly I'm going to be participating in a presentation with two colleagues at the Salus conference this October. It is a very small world. First of all, Steve, many thanks for joining us today.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Lovely. Could you start by telling us a little bit about yourself? What got you interested in design? I know you've had a long career and you've done lots and lots of different things, but can you give us a bit of a snapshot, please?
Yeah. Well, when I left school, I went to work with architects and surveyors and town planners in my hometown of York. And I wanted to be an architect, but I didn't get the A levels. I ended up doing interior design at Kingston Poly. But one of the first things I did working in York was on Lord Isher's report. He was a government minister that was asked by governments after the Second World War to work on replanning and rejuvenating towns and cities in the UK that had been affected by either bombing or by the war. York wasn't necessarily bombed during the war because there was no industry there apart from chocolates. But it had a lot of problems with the medieval structure, with heavy goods vehicles driving down medieval streets. So we looked at pedestrianisation of some of the medieval streets. So it was a conservation and pedestrianisation of the medieval parts of York. That was the first thing. And then after I graduated from Kingston in Ted Heath's 3-day-a-week, there wasn't a great deal of work. And I ended up going out to the States and working for Christo and Jean-Claude, the environmental artists famous for wrapping up buildings. And I worked on the Running Fence project. And they call themselves environmental artists, or they do. They're sadly no longer with us. But they prided themselves in that they would use recycled materials. They would always recycle the materials at the end of the project as well. So that was something that I was interested in when I was a university student, and just general things like Minster Fuller's geodesic domes that hippies were building in the States. I would go off and look for those types of things that I'd been taught about as a student. So I spent most of my 20s working backwards and forwards working in America. And then when I came back in sort of late 70s, early 80s, I formed a partnership with an old university friend, Ian Deacon Edge, we called ourselves. And we spent 1980 to 1991 working in the centre of London in High Holborn, just near Holborn Tube, then looking at low energy lighting projects, workplace design, but bringing in low energy lighting, really. Office uplighting, we would take street lights and light offices, and so that they would get rid of the overhead fluorescents that were causing flickering and glare, and the uplighting we were using we didn't have any of that. It bounced off the ceiling. So that was in the 80s for clients like Citibank, Canon, and Conoco, large companies that we were doing workplace design for. We always also tried to put in planting at the time. Weeping figs were the favourite, but also the Swiss cheese plants. But sadly, plants were one of the first things that got cut out of the budgets in those days, along with art, that we would try and add art to the walls or sculpture or whatever. And fortunately, we had some American clients, bigger banks that had art collecting policies, so that was quite exciting. Yeah, so anyway, that was most things really about early thoughts of biophilia and conservation, low energy stuff, really, sustainability. And then I went into academia, really. But moving on to your second question, which is why is biophilic design important to me as a designer? I'm a mild asthmatic, and I can smell poor indoor air quality as soon as I go into a building. And a lot of the buildings these days are you can't open the windows manually, and so sometimes the air inside the building is more polluted than the air outside in the centre of London. And it's a frightening fact, really. So I looked into VOCs, volatile organic compounds, which were in a lot of materials that interior designers were using. And when I was teaching this 15 years ago, I would get my students to look for the VOC content in the materials that they would specify.
Yeah.
But certain VOCs, as you probably know, and people listening to this probably know, will off gas or will let out fumes at certain temperatures. And unless you know the type of adhesive that you're putting down to glue carpet tiles to the floors of workspaces, you've got to be very careful what you put down. Just simple things like that, or even just the VOCs in paint. It's a lot better now, and manufacturers have certainly got round to reducing the level of VOCs.
Yeah.
So, but that's how I started doing it, basically, because I was being polluted as I coughed and sneezed my way through spaces. So,
yeah.
So,
I was
and I
going to
think
say,
also,
sorry, go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
And I think also I found that a lot of professional designers that I did CPD talks all over the place over the last 10, 15 years, and a lot of professionals didn't know what VOCs were, and or even off-gassing, and a lot of interior designers even don't understand how architects sometimes will design a green building, a brand new green building, and the real estate agents will rent spaces out because they're very healthy and they're very clean, and etc., etc. And then along come the interior designers who haven't got a clue how it works, and will sometimes inadvertently space plan desks up against a south-facing wall, and the people that are up against the glazing there will fry, and so they end up having to put air conditioning in. But it's not always the case. It's getting better for interior designers.
And I think you're right. I think people are talking more, aren't they? Their kind of discussion is more open, I think, which is really good. I mean, it's the only way forward. I mean, and you say about like the VOCs on carpet tiles and things. You go into some places that have literally just been fitted out, and you can hardly breathe from like the plastics and the furniture, taking those plastic bags off the chairs. It's like, ooh. You know, I mean, anyone who's got, even if you haven't got chest issues, it's like hard to breathe, you know? So.
Ceiling tiles were the other ones as well. But Armstrongs and people like that are pretty good these days. And the manufacturers. Fortunately, it's people are waking up. About time.
Exactly. Yeah, which is a great thing. I mean, obviously, I mean, one of the things I do want to ask you is like, why do we need biophilic design in the built environment? Obviously, health is one of those issues. But for you particularly,
I think also the fact that the built environment shapes our lives. We spend 2/3 of our lives inside buildings. We sleep for 8 hours inside buildings, so we work for 6 or 7, 8 hours, inside buildings. So it's important that we keep those as healthy as possible in the interior. And I think I remember reading years ago research about Japanese doctors prescribing Shinrin-yoku, forest bathing to patients, but I think they've been doing it probably for centuries, just to go out and breathe in colors and breathe in the atmosphere. And trees, I read also that trees give out a hormone that stimulates the vagus nerve in our brains. It calms us down. And so we breathe that in, as well as are affected by the fact that we're in nature and we're we're walking under a tree canopy, which is one of the things on the spine that we did. I'll come on to that a bit later, really, on the that we tried to create and recreate inside the spine. So, and when you go there, you'll see. Hopefully, it'll be a sunny day when you're there.
The spine is the new home for the Royal College of Physicians,
Yeah,
and obviously physicians, doctors, you'd think they'd want to be in a healthy environment. And
yeah. Well,
um,
which is what they did. The RCP in 2018 they celebrated their 500th anniversary. They were formed originally by Henry VIII,
oh, really?
500 years ago. It was a way of him regulating his physicians.
Hmm.
And they've only moved probably about 5 times, I think, in that period. So wherever they've moved to, they want to make sure that it lasts and it's fit for purpose. And they, before the spine, their existing headquarters was a Sir Dennis Lasdon brutalist building, wonderful building in Regent's Park.
Yeah.
And it's still there, they've kept it. And it was designed about 1964, I think, and Lasdon used the body as the metaphor for the concept. So part of the windows he described as the lungs, and the staircase inside the building he described as the spine. And so Rob Hopkins, who's the architect, um, he he used a similar concept for the spine of the new headquarters up in Liverpool.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a great building.
The spine itself I mean, it's a beautiful building. I mean, it's a beautiful construction. It looks like it's breathing, actually.
Yeah, well,
Inside, there's lots
yeah,
of air and
it
natural
is.
light. Yeah.
It is, and it's all the glass facade is um pretty important, really. But going back to the brief from the College of Physicians, the RTP, that they wanted it to be people to feel healthier when they came out of it than when they went in the building. Because it's a college as well as office spaces, they have young surgeons who are charged with things like diagnosing patients' problems. The building in Regent's Park, that's what it was used for as well. So, but they used actors in Regent's Park because they didn't have real people coming in. So the surgeons had to work with an actor who was pretending to have some symptoms, and they had to diagnose what those symptoms were. In spine, they've now got real patients, so they could have small kids coming in with cancer. And the sounds and the smells of hospitals are pretty scary for young kids if you're not careful. So it was really important to make it as friendly and conducive environment as possible for patients coming in that were fortunately or gratefully being used for teaching purposes. And that was the best bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's also won loads of awards, isn't it?
It has, yeah.
And actually, I mean, the World Platinum for the structure and fit out, and also the BREEAM outstanding for construction. It's got
Yeah,
109 out of a possible 110 well version 2 credits. You know, it's the
yeah,
highest of any other well building in the world. It's absolutely phenomenal. Can you
yeah.
explain a little bit about the design, about how biophilic design in particular was used to meet these like standards? And
Yeah, what we did and what I've been doing, and fortunately Josie, the interior designer, was already working with, was uh, terrapin bright greens, 14 patterns of biophilic design.
yeah.
Presumably most people will know about those.
Mm.
And we use those. It's an easy way. And they were distilled from Dr. Stephen Keller, who was an architect. Um, his his patterns that he produced, along with a few other people researching probably in the 1980s, but there were too many for people to work with. So TPG, Terrapin Bright Green, um, distilled them down into 14 patterns. And ironically, one of the authors of that was a chap called Joe Clancy, who was
Oh, yeah.
he was a landscape architect, or he's a landscape. He was a student at the University of Gloucestershire where I was teaching, on his year out working for Terrapin Bright Green, and so he became um, one of the co-authors along with Katie Ryan and Bill. What's his name? I can't remember his name now.
Bill Browning. Bill Browning.
Bill Browning. There we go. And Yeah, and so I consulted Joe. I didn't know him personally, but a colleague did, and I had a chat with Joe, and Joe put me in touch with Katie, and so we were determined not to overkill the space with too many of the pounds. You know, just use half a dozen maximum, the really ones that you want to work. And so we were looking at natural daylight, we were looking at views out to nature, views of nature. Um, Various patterns that were beneficial for us. We put a lot of other things in there about the air quality, but also looking at I worked closely with the landscape architect as well, looking at how we would gain from the indoor planting, which was Rob Hopkins termed the lungs of the building. So they're like vertical villages. We had trees going up through double height spaces. So you could walk around, again, which was one of another patterns. You'd be able to see down into other spaces where people were, where you could break out from your workplace and go and sit by nature and just have a sandwich or a cup of coffee and chat with people. And what I also added to the discussion was salutogenics. I don't know whether you know anything about salutogenics, but which is really the opposite of pathogenic. And it's Dr. Aaron Antonovsky wrote about it, I think, in the 1980s. And really trying to bring in pathogenics is looking at curing something after it's happened. Salutogenics is providing a healthy environment in the first place, you make it as healthy as possible. And we looked at places like the film star, what's his name, Leonardo DiCaprio's apartment in Manhattan, which is one of the wellness apartments. And in his apartment, he had vitamin C in the shower, and he had, I think, lavender oils, essential oils in the air conditioning. So things like that, which reduced stress. So we were suggesting that we might well have therapeutic gardens along with the planting, where you could sit and there would be herbs like mint, and you could sit and have some hot water and just pick your own herbs and put mint into your tea. So you would engage with the nature as well, part of it, rather than just pass it every day. You would try and become part with the nature that we would put into the natural materials, but also organic forms and organic shapes and the bit I was just talking about the VOCs. It's difficult to get systems furniture that with low VOCs. A lot of them have some, but we there was a mix of which was it couldn't be perfect, but it was as best as we could do it. But I mean, the other thing that we did as well that we looked at, or this was Rob's idea, the architect, looking at the British Council for Offices recommendations of air changes per hour. I think it's something like 10 air changes per hour, and Rob upped that to 12 air changes per hour. And then we've got air sensors in there, so the amount of improvement that it provided was something like 30% of the quality of air, just from simple things like air changing. And we also had sensors on it that you'll see when you go to the spine. There are sensors within the space, because we all feel heat and cold in different ways. You know, I've had students who mainly a lot of time overseas students have been sitting in the winter with fur coats and overcoats on and gloves and scarves. And then there's been young chaps from Yorkshire or Leeds sitting in shorts and t-shirts in the winter, next to them. And so the body temperatures are totally different. So in order to, rather than to have a blanket heating and temperature control, we had these sensors so that you could select in a hot desk where you wanted to go and work, your laptop or whatever it might be, and go, if it was too cold for you where you were, find out where it was a bit warmer, or vice versa, and just move around the space like that. So that became really important.
Oh, that's so good.
Going back to the facade of the building looking like it's breathing, the concept of the body that I was talking about was taken from Dennis Lasdon's concept of the Regent's Park building. and at the spine. So the outside of the building is called the skin. Traditionally, we call it the skin of the building. And so Rob's a mathematician. That's very, one of the few people I know that did some like pure maths for A levels and physics. And it was one of those types of people that love it all. And he knew about Voronoi, the Russian mathematician, who used dots to join up lines in one of his theories. And it's shortest routes to dots. And it's similar to when you magnify skin and the patterns on our skin. And there's a slide in that Rob's used, really, the abstraction of skin magnification to things like fractals in nature, all then became part of a program that I think Rob worked on and produced to get these polygons on the side, each be etched on the glazing on the skin of the building. And there are 23 million of them, each one individual, all unique. Again, like the skin of the building. And then when the sun's shining through that provides a bit of diurnal movement of like Shinrin-yoku. It's like you're in a forest platform with the patterns move on the desk. So you could be sitting in a lecture theatre or in a workspace, and the patterns are moving around, and it's calming and a good way to be distracted away from life. So that was important, and I think Voronoi pattern. I'm not explaining it very well. Rob's much better doing this, but it's used by airplane pilots. The software, for instance, if they're running out of fuel, they will find out where the nearest place to land is to refuel, and the Voronoi geometry is used by the aeroplanes to calculate the nearest line from that dot to this dot, which Voronoi calculated. Like, anyway, Rob started linking them all up like the dots into polygons. Wow. So it's not just a theory. It's never been used. It's been put into practice several times, which is good.
I bet it's lovely. I bet it's beautiful to work there, like you say, to have that dappled light through the through the window.
It is, yeah, it is. And when you go there, you'll see that on the first two floors, the ground floor and the first floor, it's not onto that glazing, because part of the well-being is community and the well standard. So we wanted the local community, as they walk by, to be interested to see inside, and there's going to be various exhibition spaces of what the RCP do over the or have done over the centuries. So we're going to have it open.
Yeah, it's lovely though, sort of opening the space for people to come and enjoy and stuff. And
well, there are also some Spanish steps in there, which are used as breakout spaces, and that again is like a buffer, I suppose, between the interior and the exterior. So people where you can sit when you get there, you can wait in the reception area, but also move about and go and sit. There's a cafe next to the reception area, the Spanish steps, where you'll see a lot of the workforce coming to just relax. And we did. There's all sorts of allusions to the body in there. For instance, the columns within the building. I think it's based on the inside of bones and structures of the bones that are perforated. Our bones are all perforated. You sometimes see an old animal bone in the woods and it's perforated. Well, our bones are perforated. And there's a reason why, because it reflects mechanical stress cleverly. So we use the same perforations, Rob did, on some of the columns. And 12-meter, quite high columns, some of these 12-meter long columns, single cut concrete. And other things going up the stairs next to the Spanish steps. Instead of having plaster, we put, I mentioned this product called Clay Works, and it's a clay plaster, opposed to a gypsum plaster, and it absorbs toxins in the air. And it's quite clever, and they're based in Cornwall, I think, somewhere. So they're quite good. So we've used simple things like that to
That's great. So
to aid the
innovation.
spaces in
Yeah,
materials,
yeah, yeah.
healthy materials, edible walls. So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. And
yeah,
I love the fact as well that you kind of, it's biomimicry, isn't it? I
yeah,
suppose as well, using
yeah,
the structure of the bone to
yeah.
the support for a building.
It
Um,
is. It
yeah,
is biomimicry, yeah. And
yeah.
the whole idea of the spine, it looks like vertebrae at the back of the staircase. And we had quite a few things that we suggested that got value engineered out.
Mm.
One of them was to try and have some interactive artwork on the stairs to encourage people to use the stairs rather than um, use the lifts.
Yeah.
And I think and post COVID as well, people don't always like going in lifts too
Yeah,
much.
no.
Um, but the spiral staircase that's in the reception area and around um, along some of the vertical villages, again, that's to encourage people to use stairs rather than lifts.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes them healthier, doesn't it, by walking up the stairs as well.
Yeah,
So all these
yeah,
aspects are really, really well thought of. And
yeah,
maybe we could talk about light. Obviously, biophilic design and lighting is
yeah.
kind of like this whole circadian rhythm. And do you have any particular examples of how biophilic design has been used to create better or happier, healthier places in terms of how lighting has been used?
Yeah. Well, you've just mentioned circadian rhythms there. It's difficult to measure circadian rhythms
Mm,
um, because I know a lighting designer, Mary Rushton Beals, that worked with her. She is used to doing it, has been doing it for 30 odd years,
mm,
and it's quite difficult because you've got monitors on the desk that affect your light readings that you're taking, and so it's not always perfect. But I managed to find some research into because a lot of people think circadian rhythms are a bit hippie-ish, and that you should really think about them. But there's been research into simple things like sunlight reflecting off a desk at lunchtime
mm,
when you're sitting, if you've got natural light coming in, can affect your circadian rhythms, where it sort of gives you a boost, um, ready for the rest of the day, and vice versa. When our bodies are starting to close down at night time, you don't need as much bright sunlight because your bodies are looking to close down. So we did look at the role of lighting for circadian rhythms, but also just generally keeping the plants alive.
yeah.
Um, the landscape architects, we suggested it, but I think they already knew about it. But there was a study done by NASA, North American Space Agency, in the 1960s, looking at, they were thinking about putting domes on the moon and how we would keep the air quality, what plants could absorb the toxins in the air the best. And they did a lot of studies. And so the NASA studies is really, we've been using that for many years, people have. So we looked at specifying some of the plants there that they'd suggested that they were going to stick on the moon 50 years ago. Um, and and they were selected. And there's quite a few like that. Not all of them, but the majority of them. And then looking at how we light them, because similar to us,
Yeah.
plants like to sleep as well.
Yeah.
So they don't want to be lit all night long. So
Yeah.
the whole way of which you put a timer on and allow the plants to sleep was really important. And where you actually shine them, when you commission the lights and you make sure they're going to the right places. When these spotlights that Mary put in the planters were incredibly important.
Mm.
In general, really, the quality of lighting and the color tone of lighting that you use in the rest of the building was important.
Exactly. And it saves energy as well, doesn't it? If you turn the blasted things off at the end of the day, it's kind of
Yeah,
going to
yeah.
save energy.
You've not got
Yeah,
the whole city
exactly.
lighting up like a candle all night
I
long. Yeah,
know. Exactly. Exactly. I mean, and that's going to kill the insects and stuff, which
yeah,
a different podcast.
yeah.
But there's obviously biophilic design is we talk about it for well-being, we talk about it for health, but it's also obviously a great design principle for
Yeah,
the well-being and health of the planet as well. For
yeah,
you, how do you link biophilic design to like life cycle assessments and materials and finishes and companies trying to reach net zero and circular economy and
yeah,
competition?
yeah,
There's obviously you mentioned the clay product, for instance.
yeah, yeah,
I mean, there's lots of things like that, isn't it? Where we're trying to bring in
yeah,
more natural patterns and natural materials and wood,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
alternatives, really.
Yeah, there is. I mean, I tend to look at people like Ellen MacArthur Foundation.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you know her.
Mm.
She was around the world yachtswoman, Dame Ellen MacArthur, and she saw a lot of pollution
Yeah.
when she was sailing around the world, and determined to do something about it when she came back. She's formed the foundation that she's got.
Yeah.
And uh, organizations like ARAPS, the architects and engineers, which she's
Mm.
worked with, and they've got a um, good video on their blog, sorry, on their website.
Yeah.
I think it's Ellen MacArthur and ARAPS together, looking at how to get to net zero and how to get to the circular economy. And we looked at also design for disassembly. So in other words, rather than um, at the end of the life cycle of a particular product or object,
Mm.
FF&E in the space, um, rather than just skipping it, throwing it away at the end, how could it be dismantled, uh, repositioned, removed? Because um, a lot of products are using adhesives that you can't
Yeah.
recycle. So it was important that we had uh, some detailing in there that make it easily accessible for maintenance purposes, um, and generally replacing materials at the end of their life cycle. So that became important. And we also looked at I don't think this was taken in, but way of people like Philips lighting
Mm.
in Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam. They rent the airport rents the light from Philips. So it's Philips' responsibility to maintain it and keep it and use
Okay.
it. So you change the mindset in terms of rather than procuring things, you look at renting, and that was another option. But I don't. I think again, value engineered out.
Mm.
But generally, keeping things in the loop as long as possible from a um, economy point of view is
Yeah.
one of the top.
Yeah. It's a really good idea, actually, renting the lighting.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you
The
say,
Schiphol.
they can, yeah, it makes
Yeah,
sense to them because then they can maintain it. And then when it's
yeah,
finished, they can replace it with another one
yeah,
or reuse
yeah,
it
yeah.
or,
And they
yeah,
recycle. So it's up to them to make. It's important for them
makes sense.
to make sure they can recycle it.
Yeah, yeah,
They're
yeah,
just throwing stuff
exactly.
away.
Because
So
even if you own it, you're still going to have to replace it. So there's going to be a cost.
yeah,
There's a sort of
yeah,
this
yeah,
mindset of like, I've got to have everything. I've got to control everything, got to own everything. But actually, that's very liberating too, isn't it? Because if
yeah,
something's
yeah,
wrong, it's like, I suppose, like lease hiring a car, same mindset.
yeah. Oh, leasing a car. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Do you have favorite biophilic design strategies? And there's like a gazillion that you've mentioned today already. But do you have
yeah.
favorites at all? I mean,
Um, the, it's a thing that I suppose it's quite difficult, but I like the element of play
yeah.
um, in spaces, so that you distract yourself from the
Mm.
drudgery and the stress and the strain of things, and provide something that um, you can interact with. And there's I don't know whether you know a chap called Dan Roosgaard. I think he's Dutch as well. Roosgaarde or GAA. Roosgaard Studio, and
Mm.
he's come up with all sorts of sculptural, interactive things throughout his career, and he's got uh, structures that absorb toxins in the air and give out fresh air. But one of the things that we wanted to try and do was perhaps have some kinetic sculptures as you came into the building
Mhm.
that were activated by movement as you passed by the sensors, and maybe fans would go and blow salutogenic oils at you as you walk by, and the kids could interact. It would
Yeah,
calm the kids down,
yeah,
um, and it
yeah,
was a way of uh, looking at play and at fun, but at the same time making it healthy. So I think the element of design and fun and play becomes really important. It gets forgotten about, but Root Guard's very good, and there are loads of other people that do a lot of playful.
Yeah, I'll look him up actually. I'll find his web URL.
Yeah, Dan Roosgaard, yeah, is
Yeah,
excellent stuff.
yeah, amazing. I think it's one
Yeah,
of my favorite Biophilic design strategies actually is that just like what you mentioned about the hexagons and the play of the
yeah,
light coming through,
yeah,
sort of dappled light, and but this non-rhythmic movement. And
yeah,
I love mobiles. I love things
yeah,
kind of like that just sort of that just create that because if you're in a normal built environment, if you're in a normal workplace or
yeah,
healthcare or wherever it is, and you're just sitting there, you've got this stationary environment, which usually has
yeah,
white walls around you, and there's no movement. And because we think it's like going to
yeah,
be in front before a storm, or
yeah,
it's like we and that this whole is so, and that's liberating actually, isn't it?
yeah,
You have this kind of slight swaying or
yeah,
a little bit
yeah.
of randomness.
Oh, just the presence of water that
Yes.
you can have a fountain in there or mini waterfall pumping around. You just go and sit by the sound of it and the movement of it.
Yeah.
And again, that sends out endorphins. I think water's quite good at all that.
Yeah.
Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, the element of play and movement that becomes really important.
So, Steve, the final question that I ask everybody who comes on the podcast. If you could paint the world with a magic brush of biophilia, what would it look like, Steve?
It's again, this is an element of play. I'd like to make the cities a bit more playful and interactive,
Yeah.
so that we're not all just locked into little robots like in Lang's Metropolis going to sort of feed the machine of work in the cities. And there's a few years ago, probably I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, there's an organization called Squint Opera. And if you Squint Opera out there, I think they're like advertising people and they come up with events and also, and they did something looking at the rise of the water and sea levels in the world, but mainly around London and how that would affect. And they had like St Paul's Cathedral would be flooded, and there's an image of all a big fella jumping into swimming in St Paul's Cathedral. So the way in which you get people to engage with such a serious issue as climate change, sea levels rising, to make it humorous, I think makes it much more engaging and make it playful. So that's what I'd throw in. That if I could, I'd make it a bit more humorous. The whole agenda of it all, so that it's not all doom and gloom. We can, if we do something quickly enough, we can sort this out.
Thank you for listening to the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast.